Hello everyone, today I want to talk about how Germany is really being foolish, and with nothing better to do, they're pulling in Japan and Indonesia to go up against China. On top of that, Europe has formed another losers alliance, all banding together to do something pointless, mobilizing en masse just to accompany Zelenskyy to meet Trump. After 3 years of a pointless war in Ukraine and being humiliated by the US in a tariff war, Europe still seems like it hasn't woken up, acting all eager and ready for action everywhere. The first pointless example is everyone mobilizing to go visit the US. After the US leaders' summit, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy has confirmed that he will visit the White House on August 18th to meet with US President Trump. Earlier, Trump told European leaders that he was willing to consider providing Ukraine with security guarantees similar to NATO's Article 5. This is seen as a major shift in Trump's stance. On August 17th, the U.S. Special Envoy for the Russia-Ukraine issue, Vitkov, said that Russian President Putin had agreed to accept strong security guarantees for Ukraine from both the U.S. and Europe as part of a peace agreement. Trump invited Zelenskyy to the U.S. to meet him, aiming to use the security guarantee clause to pressure Zelenskyy into accepting the various ceasefire proposals put forward by Putin. Zelenskyy was worried that Trump would play tricks on him in the U.S., so he gathered a group of European political leaders to accompany him for support. On August 17th itself, a whole host of European leaders confirmed one after another that they would soon be heading to the US for the meeting, including UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Von der Leyen said on social media platform X that on August 17th, she would first welcome Zelenskyy in Brussels, where they would attend the European Leaders Volunteer Alliance meeting together. At Zelenskyy's invitation, she would be the first to go to the US, meeting with Trump and other European leaders at the White House. German federal government spokesperson Cornelius said in a statement that Chancellor Merkel will also travel to Washington on August 18th to attend a meeting between Zelenskyy and Trump. This trip will serve as an information exchange following the U.S. leaders' summit. Chancellor Merkel will discuss the current state of peace efforts with heads of state and government, and will emphasize Germany's interest in a swift peace agreement for Ukraine. The talks will cover issues such as security guarantees, territorial matters, continued support for Ukraine and resisting Russia, as well as maintaining pressure on Russia through sanctions. Afterwards, France and the UK also issued similar statements. However, CNN poured cold water on the situation, saying that whoever accompanies Zelenskyy into the White House will find it a thankless task. CNN's analysis points out that Europe is once again eager to influence Trump, but the meeting between Trump and Putin has suddenly overturned the principles he agreed upon with European leaders less than a week ago, leaving Europeans shocked. At the core of this is the fact that Europe originally demanded that Russia must first ceasefire in Ukraine before any reconciliation talks could take place. CNN says the ball is back in Europe's court, and Europe is anxious to come up with a unified plan before the US holds its meeting. CNN says that Europeans believe it's best not to publicly contradict Trump, but instead try to emphasize the positive aspects, such as highlighting the security guarantees Trump proposed for Ukraine. But CNN concludes that whoever accompanies Zelenskyy into the Oval Office will be taking on a thankless task, trying to persuade Trump to accept Europe's principles. In other words, Trump previously claimed that he had already agreed to these principles. Let me raise another question. Why are so many European leaders so eager to get involved and discuss Ukraine's future with Trump? Just half a month ago, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was in Scotland negotiating a trade deal with Trump. Why was it that at that time, not a single major European country said they wanted to join in, or at least go to Scotland to support von der Leyen and give her some backing? It's probably because supporting Ukraine is seen as politically correct, so these European politicians are happy to get involved. But when it comes to negotiating trade with Trump, they're afraid of messing up and losing points, so they just hide behind the European Commission. What's even more ironic now is that Trump's stance of supporting a quick ceasefire in Ukraine is actually what's truly beneficial for Europe, rather than what these European leaders are doing, pouring huge sums into supporting Ukraine to fight a war they can't win. Germany's new Foreign Minister Johann Wadefuhl, appointed in May, began his first Asia trip this week to Japan and Indonesia, likely using China issues to drum up momentum.
Waterful said Germany sees Japan and Indonesia as key partners.
He said that in dealing with the so-called global security crisis caused by Russia and China, Indonesia and Japan are equally important partners. He also mentioned the significance and economic potential of these two populous countries in Asia. He said, "Our freedom, prosperity, and security depend not only on Europe, but to a large extent also on cooperation with global strategic partners. That's why I'm heading to Japan and Indonesia today." When talking about the purpose of his visit, he said that in the Indo-Pacific region, there are hardly any countries that share as many similarities with Germany as Japan does. We share common values and interests, and we also face the same enormous challenges that are testing our way of life. Altmaier said that the situation in the Indo-Pacific will largely determine the degree of freedom of navigation and the security of global supply chains, and thus shape the direction of global economic development. This is not only crucial for major export economies like Germany and Japan, but equally important for Indonesia and other ASEAN countries, as well as new partners. Altmaier went on to say that China's so-called aggressive actions in the Taiwan Strait, East China Sea, and South China Sea will also affect Europe, posing a threat to the principles of global coexistence. He declared that Germany is committed to establishing a rules-based international order, underpinned by the force of law and binding on everyone, to address this challenge.
On X, he wrote, "Economically, we aim for a strong, resilient economy through diverse raw material partners and supply chains. Germany, with Japan and Indonesia, advocates for free, competitive, fair economic relations." Waterful, aligned with Chancellor Merz's CDU, declared China a systemic rival upon taking office.
Both he and Chancellor Merz are from the ruling Christian Democratic Union, and he is a loyal ally of Merz. For the first time in decades, the Chancellor and the Foreign Minister are from the same party. Analysts believe that the new German government will adopt a more unified and tougher approach in its China policy. If you look at German Foreign Minister Kahl's rhetoric, like calling China a systemic rival, talking about supply chain security, freedom of navigation, and advocating for a rules-based international order, it's exactly the same narrative as the Biden administration in the US. These are all the labels that liberal Western politicians use for China. The problem is, the US is now under the far-right Trump administration, whose political views are quite similar to Germany's far-right Alternative for Germany party. They don't talk about so-called global democratic values at all, and are actively undermining allies like the EU. What's surprising is that politicians from Germany's CDU seem to be asleep, completely unresponsive, as if they haven't woken up, showing total indifference to the EU and the US signing a new Treaty of Nanjing. German Chancellor Merz is still siding with the US through thick and thin, while Foreign Minister Igor wants to team up with Japan and Indonesia in Asia to go against China, completely ignoring the crisis caused by America's high tariffs on them, still lost in their own dreams of being a great power. China really has nothing to say when facing opponents like these. The third ridiculous example is France trying to overthrow Mali. In recent years, relations between France and its former West African colony Mali have been deteriorating. The Malian military government recently issued a statement saying they had foiled a subversive plot, arresting dozens of officers and a French national who was allegedly trying to undermine the country's stability. After 2 days of silence, the French Foreign Ministry finally confirmed on August 16 that the arrested French citizen was an employee of the French embassy, but insisted that the allegations were completely unfounded. On August 14, Mali's Minister of Security and Civil Protection, Mahamadou Koune, accused the French national named Vézelier on a television program, claiming that he was acting on behalf of French intelligence agencies and attempting to overthrow the current Malian government by inciting Malian politicians, social figures, and members of the military. Malian media discovered that in 2020, Vézelier was listed as religious on the official website of the French government. According to the Associated Press, France has stationed troops in Mali since 2013. However, after the Malian military government came to power, expelled the French troops, and replaced them with Russia's Wagner Group, relations between the two countries began to grow tense. From 2020 to 2022, after 2 consecutive coups in Mali, relations between France and Mali deteriorated even further. France's influence in Africa is already on the decline. Even weak countries like Mali, which lack strategic resources, now dare to stand up against France. Yet France still clings to its imperialist mindset, sending spies to other countries to subvert their governments. France's military power around the world is far inferior to that of the United States, and trying to imitate the US by stirring up color revolutions in other countries seems to be getting harder and harder to pull off. France wants to maintain its influence over its former colonies in Africa, but these are just face-saving projects and are basically useless when it comes to sustaining a strong Europe. In conclusion, European countries lack strong military and economic power, don't have any notable large-scale AI models, no major social media platforms, and no powerful new energy enterprises. China, on the other hand, has all of these and can compete with the United States. Even in the automotive industry, Europe has been beaten by China. These days, instead of focusing on improving themselves or negotiating with the US for more favorable trade deals, Europe acts like a bunch of cowards, yet still goes around showing off. What kind of future do these failed countries even have?